All right, welcome everybody. We see you streaming in. The flock is gathering for this painted bunting drawing class with Fiona Gillogly. We're so lucky and honored to be here with her today and to be here in celebration of Pride as well. And let's go birding together. And we're just going to give everyone a minute to arrive. And while you're flying in, feel free to share in the chat where you're coming in from today. And because we're celebrating this really fabulous colorful plumage of the painted bunting, if you have a colorful bird that's absolutely your absolute favorite, please share in the chat. We'd love to see which bird you love to see, be it a bright yellow bird, a bright blue bird, red, whatever color is your favorite. Feel free to share with us. We'd love to hear it. And we're just going to give folks a few minutes to come on in on the wing before we get rolling. Make sure you get your paper, your drawing utensils. Fiona, what other materials you want them to prepare?
Yeah, just anything that you're going to be using for color. So colored pencils, paint if you have it, and just a graphite pencil and something to draw on, and you're all good.
Awesome. And I'm Molly Songs with Audubon, California. And we're really stoked to be here as part of this Drawing Bird series that we've been doing with Fiona and John Muir Laws. You may have been here before. Maybe this is your first drawing class, but welcome. And get comfortable. And we'll give you just a few minutes to gather your things and get ready for class. Let's see. And again, we're so happy to be here with Fiona, who's an emerging artist with a real amazing passion for birds and nature journaling. She's created more than 2,000 nature journal pages since 2016, which is just phenomenal. And she studied nature journaling with, as we mentioned, John Muir Laws. Fiona's a 6-time recipient of the Central Valley Bird Club Youth Scholarship, and she volunteers her time with research and conservation, including bird surveys, nest box monitoring, bird banding, bird walks, and you've taught classes for lots of amazing organizations like the Exploratorium in San Francisco, Environment for the Americas, Point Reyes Birding Festival, and we are just so lucky and honored to be here with you today, Fiona. And as I mentioned, this is a bit of a celebration of Pride and Audubon's Let's Go Birding Together program, which creates safe and inviting spaces for our LGBTQIA++ families and friends and allies to enjoy birding in the outdoors, because birding's for everyone, no matter who you love. So as we're going, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We do have closed captions up and running. And we are going to be recording this class and sending it around. So if you registered or you want to watch on Facebook, it'll be available either directly to you through an email blast afterwards, or you can check it out on our Facebook page. And if you are feeling like you want to share your drawings today, we would invite you to use the hashtag #NatureJournalAudubon on Instagram so that we can see what you've done. We'd love to see it. So without further ado, welcome, Fiona. Please share a little bit about you and how you got into nature journaling. And again, we're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. I want to start by saying thank you so much to Audubon, California, and to Molly Songas for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here today and teach you all how to draw a painted bunting. So just a little bit of background on me. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on a second. There we go. There we are. So I have been drawing birds for forever. This was an honest hummingbird that I drew for my mom when I was 5. And I've always loved birds and I've always loved nature. But I've been sort of an official birder since I was 11. Although technically my spark bird, as they say in the birding community, like the bird that got you into birding, was a chicken. So I got chickens when I was 6 years old, and I loved them and I pet them and I held them and I named them. And they sort of became my first love of birds. And from there, I sort of expanded to birds in my backyard. I found an old field guide that belonged to my dad that was very outdated, and a lot of the names have since been changed. But I got very excited and I started identifying all the birds in my yard. And that was really, really fun. And then my first official bird walk was at a place called Trailer Ranch. And I had so much fun. I met one of my first birding mentors there, the guy who led the walk. And I got to go on my first like official bird walk. So from there, I got a bird box at my house, and I got to watch baby oak titmice grow up and fledge, which was super cool to see. Got to monitor the box from when the parents started building the nest to when they laid eggs to when the babies hatched and then when they flew away, and documented that whole process as well, and took lots of notes about it. So that was such a joy. And one of the ways that I love to learn about birds is to draw them. So at the school that I go to, or the school that I went to, every 8th grader is required to do some kind of project at the end of their 8th grade year. And so I decided I wanted to draw the 40 most common birds in my area. So I decided that I was going to do that. And John Muir Laws agreed to be my mentor. So I was 14 years old at the time. So here's Jack and I. We had a lot of fun. I was drawing nearly every day. And I would draw a bird and I would send it to him and he would give me feedback on it. We'd have long meetings, we'd draw for hours. It was so much fun. So here's kind of an example of what I do. So here's the photograph that I worked from and then the painting that I did. And this was a lot more like focused art that I was doing like inside. This wasn't as much nature journaling. But something that I really did get to see in myself was how much I grew as an artist, even in that short time. So this is something that Jack encouraged me to do, to draw a robin at the beginning of the project, and then that same robin from the same photograph at the end. And you can see from me drawing every day for 16 weeks, you can see how much I improved even in just that short time. And this is just a huge emphasis that drawing is not some talent that you are gifted with at birth. And the more you draw, the better you get. And even if you don't think you're that good at drawing, that's okay. Just keep drawing and you will get better. And that's a huge lesson that Jack has taught me. So something else that Jack has taught me is nature journaling. So this is me with my stack of nature journals before I cut my hair. And I have created almost more than 2,000 nature journal pages over the years. I've been journaling since my 13th birthday, so nearly 6 years now. And so that is something that I absolutely love. It combines two things that I love, which is art and nature. So basically, it's sort of like field sketching. You take your art kit out into nature and you use words and pictures and numbers to draw and document whatever you see. And there's really no wrong way to do it as long as you're having fun and enjoying nature and noticing more, you're doing it right, which is also a really cool part of the community, that there's really no like one specific way that you can nature journal. And for me, it makes birding more fun. So if I journal, I notice more, and the more I notice, the more fun it gets. So like this is a great horned owl that I saw, and my mom and I pulled off the road and we drew it for a while. And the pictures don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be pretty. That's okay. I love to ask a lot of questions. So you can see little colored question marks all over the page. I love to ask questions about what I'm looking at and make observations and notes and fun titles and put in little comics. I found an owl pellet and I did like a whole inventory of everything that was in it, which was really fun. So this is kind of an example of what I do in my nature journal. So I rarely do like studio art other than my 8th grade project. But since this is a class celebrating Pride, I wanted to share this. This is a piece that I did a couple years ago, and I decided I was going to find a bird for each of the colors of my Pride flags. So I'm panromantic and asexual. So these are those two flags. We have American crow, oak titmouse, snowy egret, and violet-backed starling for the ace flag, and then roseate spoonbill, yellow warbler, and mountain bluebird for the pan flag. So I had a lot of fun with this. I spent like 4 days doing all the layers of paint. I spent so much time on this, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. This is another thing that I love to do. So since it is Pride Month, I picked a bird for us to draw that's super colorful and has sort of become a queer birding icon, and that is the painted bunting. So the painted buntings spend their breeding season in northern Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and nearby states. And then they winter along the east and west coast of Mexico, as well as in Florida. And you can see from the map here, the red is breeding season, the yellow is migration, and the blue is wintering. So their breeding plumage is only in the summer. In non-breeding season, they're sort of green and grayish, sort of mottled. And so, yeah, so that's the end of my slideshow. So now I'm going to move over to my document camera. Right. All right. All right. Hold on just a second. So I have to turn the camera. Hold on. There we go. All right. So here's my paper. Here's the picture that I'm going to be drawing from. So normally how I would start is I would start with what's called a non-photo blue pencil. So this is a pencil from way back when, and it basically doesn't show up on a photocopier. And it is super helpful. It's super pale blue. And the cool thing about it is once you finish sketching, it basically sort of melts into the background and you barely even notice it. But since it's such a light pencil, it doesn't show up through this document camera. So I'm going to be using a darker blue pencil to sort of show you what lines I would draw, just to sort of make sure that you can see what I'm doing. But normally I would use this non-photo blue pencil, and this is what I use in the field. So I would sort of start by sort of looking at the posture of the bird and the general kind of angle that it's at. So it sort of has kind of a body that's sort of at an angle like this. So I'm just sort of going to sketch in a little oval like that, just sort of very lightly, just so that I can paint over it later. And then sort of determine where the head is on that oval. So for this bird, it's about there. And sort of at this point, you can say, did I make the head too big? Did I make the head too small? I actually think I made it a little too small, so I'm just going to sort of add a few little lines right here. So something about this stage, you can change anything. You can make as many lines as you want, and you can go over the lines you want to keep later. So next, I'm going to sort of put in the tail. So the tail is going to kind of come out like this. There's sort of the slope of the back. I'm going to sort of go over the front of the bird. And then I'm going to block in the wing. So the wing, I used to be terrified of wings because there are all these little lines and all these feathers, and there's so much anatomy and it's kind of scary. But for sure, you can just sort of block in the wing kind of like this. You just kind of make it a block of feathers. It's not a big deal. And you don't really have to be scared about it. So then I'm going to sort of draw in the feet of the bird. So this bird sort of has a foot coming like this, and then just some toes right here that you can barely see. So I'm going to sort of block in that little bit, sort of the angle of that foot down, and sort of block in some toes like that. And then I'm going to draw the branch next to the feet of the bird. You can sort of just block in kind of a branch where you want it to sit. And something about that, always draw the feet first before the branch, because if you draw the branch, then you have to like elongate the legs and the feet to fit it to the branch, and it kind of looks funky. So you always want to draw the legs and feet first and then draw the branch to those. So birds often look kind of round, but if you sort of look, there's little inflection points along that curve, so you can kind of accentuate those. So next, I'm going to draw in the eye and the beak. So the eye and the beak are typically along the same line. There's some ducks and waterfowl that kind of have a strange eye placement. But for songbirds like this, the eye and the beak are going to be in the same line. So I'm going to draw in an eye and beak line like that. And so I'm going to sort of, if you see there's sort of a little forehead coming in right here. So I'm just going to sort of sketch in that. And then I'm going to draw in the beak. So this bird has a very thick beak, and you can sort of see that it's There we go. It sort of looks like almost a finch beak. And it's sort of got a little point at the end. And then from there, sort of following that same line, I'm going to place the eye on that same line. So that's where the eye is going to be. I'm going to sort of add a little bit of angles to the back here. And something that really helps in this gesture sketch phase is negative space. So if you see sort of basically negative space is drawing where the bird isn't. So basically the space around the bird. And so in this case, there's some angles back here that I can sort of draw in that'll make that sort of look better, and under the chin like this. I think that actually comes out a little further, sort of in like that. I actually don't really like the shape of my beak, but that's okay. I can change it and make it actually a little smaller. Just gonna take out a little bit of that. And that's okay. At this stage, you can totally change your mind. That's all right. And then the back of the wing, I'm just going to sort of block in a few more little feathers. So these are the coverts here, secondary coverts and primary coverts. And then these are all kind of the back feathers. So I'm just sort of going to block in those secondary coverts and primary coverts, and add in a few more little lesser coverts and back feathers in there. Sort of block out where the colors are going to be. Sort of like that. And there's sort of the general gesture sketch of the bird that I would start with. So from there, I would then want to come in with a pencil. So I use a very fine graphite pencil. It's a 0.3, so it's very small, but you can use whatever graphite pencil you have. That's totally fine. So basically, you're going to want to look at these lines and decide which lines you want to keep. So I have a lot of lines on this page, a lot of sort of messy gesture sketch lines. So I'm going to go over the ones that I want to keep with graphite pencil. So I'm going to come along here. I'm going to start up here with the bird, sort of draw in that little forehead area, and then come in and draw the beak, curve down like that. It's actually a little too steep of a curve. That's all right. Come in right here. Right here is where the nose of the bird is. I'm going to sketch in that, and where the bill is separated. Down like that, and coming up to meet that other line. So there's the beak of the bird, choosing the lines that I wanted to keep. And then I'm going to go down to the chin, so sort of like that, and out to the front, sort of slope back to here. I'm going to draw in the leg right there, and then continue on, go out to the tail, sort of quickly sketch in that, undertail coverts on top. And then I'm going to sort of go back to the back and up to where I started again. So now I'm going to work a little bit on the face. So I'm going to start with sort of sketching in the eye again. Just to sort of decide where I want that. If you see this bird has a little red eye ring, it's beautiful. So I'm just going to quickly block in that. It's sort of in two pieces, sort of comes down to here, and then another longer piece right there. So I'm going to draw that. Those are like super, super fine red feathers there. And then right in here, this little gray part, that's the lores. And you'll see that on a lot of buntings. This will often be a dark color, like dark brown, dark gray, or black. And so you'll see it in lazuli buntings, in indigo buntings. Often that little spot is dark. So I'm going to shade that in right now and sort of block it out. And that's sort of the bit between the eye and the beak. Block that out. Draw in that, and then sort of the boundaries between the colors. I'm just going to sort of shade in. This blue comes down a little bit, kind of like a little hat. And you can see a little bit of the blue on the other side, so I'm just going to quickly block that in as well. And then if you see there's a little bit of blue coming down in there, so I'm just going to sort of block that out for later when I add color. Then in the back, that bright lime green comes about to here, and then kind of comes back like that. Then some of these coverts in here, I'm just going to quickly block in. Doesn't need to be perfect, just sort of suggestion of feathers. You don't have to draw everyone. Sort of come down that leading edge of the wing to here. And then for these feathers, they're sort of stacked on top of each other, if you see. So basically, I'm going to start at the top with these kind of 1, 2, 3. So these are called the tertials. And often when birds molt into their breeding plumage, this is one of the first feathers to molt for their breeding plumage. And often that's the only ones that they molt for their wing feathers, because these are the ones that are in the sun the most, and so they get the most wear. So often you'll see these feathers will be really drab, but these feathers will be super bright because they just molted them in, and it's very exciting. So I'm going to draw in those tertials like that. That's actually not quite at the right angle. That's all right. I'll erase them and draw them again. So I'm going to sort of slant them a little more that way. And then here's going to be all those feathers all lined up the same way. So I'm just sort of going to draw in some lines. And if you see, it sort of just suggests that there's feathers there, but I'm not like going in and drawing every feather barb. So I'm going to go down the side of the wing like that. And that's pretty much the most pencil treatment that I'm going to give to the wing. I'm going to put in a few edges for the secondary coverts, a little bit of definition on the primary coverts, and that's pretty much it. So then I'm going to go down to the feet. Now the feet can be super scary. I was scared of feet for years. Basically, they're super scaly and have tons of joints and nails and fun stuff. And while it can be really fun to do like detailed bird foot studies, often it's just totally fine if you just want to block in just the general suggestion of feet and toes. And that sort of just gives the suggestion of bird feet very quickly. Just sort of scribble some lines in there, and then sort of draw in the branch to fit around the feet. One thing about bird feet is that the back toe is one bone, so it doesn't actually bend. So often, if you see a bird on a branch, you'll see that that back toe is straight. Except for the nail curling down. So that's often a little something you can add in. And that's going to kind of be my general pencil sketch. And so next I'm going to be talking about shading. So shading, usually I would do before I add color. And it actually makes adding color a lot easier because then you don't have to mix in shade colors. You can just paint one color over it and your shading's already there. So you can use a graphite pencil for this. You can use a colored pencil for this. I'm going to be using a colored pencil. This is like a super dark kind of purple, kind of shaded in the corner. It's like nearly black, but it's like dark purple. So I'm going to just do some really fast shading on this bird before I start talking about some color. So I'm going to start sort of shading on the underside of the belly. If you see, there's sort of shade here and on the edge, on that leading edge of the wing. Shade in the leading edge of the wing, in the back here, and the tail. And sort of shade in that area in the flanks. Sort of come up the side, and then under the chin, there's often a little bit of shading. You can see a little bit of dark under the chin, so I'm going to add that. I'm also going to add a little bit of shade, especially to those tertials, and then just a few lines on the wing like that, just to sort of quickly block in that. And you can sort of show that these feathers are sort of on top of these by sort of putting a little bit of shade underneath those feather tracks right there. So then I'm going to add some shade to the eye. Then also, like I talked about before, that little lores area that's so prominent on buntings, I'm going to add a little bit of shade to there. And also along that line of the beak and underneath the beak. So now, a little bit of shade on the branch. All right, so now I get to talk about one of my favorite things, and that is color. I love adding color to drawings. And I often use watercolor. You can use colored pencil, and often some of the same techniques, some of the layering and glazing techniques for watercolor work very similarly for colored pencil. So don't worry if you don't have watercolor. If you do, that's great. If not, you can totally use colored pencil. Or if the bird flies away at this point, you still have a great sketch and you're totally fine. And that's okay. You can make little notes. You can be like, it had a blue head, it had a green back, it had a red belly. Oh my gosh, it's so pretty. If you were to see this bird in the wild. So I'm going to start with that red because it looks beautiful and I want to paint it first. So I'm going to sort of use a very bright red that I have in my palette. And I'm going to mix it with some orange to make it even brighter because it's such a beautiful color. Sort of shade that in. All right, and I'm going to get pretty thick paint because I'm not going to be doing a lot of layers on this because there's not a lot of change in color here. So I'm just going to sort of put some paint down. It's actually a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. All right, I'm going to lighten that up a little bit. I think I might go over this a few times with a few different layers. You can totally do this in colored pencil too, just sort of shade a light layer on top and then sort of layer other colors on top if you'd like. I'm gonna sort of layer that in. I'm gonna put a little bit of that bright red on the back as well. Over the tail. That. All right, so now I'm going to come back with another layer of paint. At the top of that, a little bit of a brighter red. Sort of once I've got that base coat of orange. This is actually showing up a lot darker on the document cam than it does on my paper. Kind of funny. So the brush that I'm using is a water brush, which is super cool. I'll talk a little bit more about it once I finish this wash. There we go. All right, so while that dries, so this is a water brush. So basically there's water in the handle of it, and it's really nice because that means the brush always stays moist. So you can sort of squeeze the handle for more water and then wipe it off. This is an old sock that I've repurposed as a paint rag and just sort of clean it, and it's already cleaned and you can put the cap back on. And this means you don't have to carry water with you to wash out your brush, which is really nice because then you don't have to dump the water out. And often there's toxic things in paint that aren't very good to dump out on the ground. So in this case, you have it all in this paint rag and then you can wash this out later. So that's dry and it's getting there. All right, so next I'm gonna go with that bright green. So if you see here, it's almost yellow, like that. That highlight color there is so bright green. So I'm gonna do an entire underpainting for that with bright yellow, just to sort of emphasize how bright green that is. So on the back, I'm just gonna do that brilliant yellow, and then I'm gonna leave that to dry. And while I'm leaving that to dry, I'm going to work, I think I'm going to work a little bit on the wing. So if you notice the wing sort of has a few little sort of orangey red highlights as well as some green. And then it's got sort of that dark brownish grayish color in the shadows. So I'm going to sort of mix up some sort of grayish green. So I don't really clean out my palette much, and that's because I go back and use colors that I've already mixed to mix more. And so I don't really clean out my mixing areas because often chances are I've mixed a similar color like it before. So often if you want, you can sort of test a color in the corner and be like, does that look right? I think I want it a little bit yellow, more yellow. So I'm going to get some more brighter green. That, oh. Yeah. That's a little more like the green that I want. So I'm gonna sort of shade in those tertials in that bright green. That, and then across the wing like that. And I'm gonna get a little bit of orange, sort of bring in those edges there. And that's gonna kind of be my quick base coat for the wing. And once that has dried, then I can come back and add in those shadows. So now, is this dry? Yes, it is. Perfect. So now that this yellow wash on the back is dry, I'm going to come back with a little bit of a darker green. Still very vibrant, but not quite bright yellow. And I'm going to shade in sort of all the areas that are sort of a little bit darker, and I'm going to fade in that sort of line into that yellow. So that yellow is still preserved along that little edge so that it's very bright. Then I'm going to go a little bit darker with that green, and sort of, if you see it, sort of gets from lighter to darker like that. So I'm going to shade in a little bit more green here and also bring in some of that bright green for the secondary coverts there. And this also works with colored pencil too. You can go with a quick little sketch of yellow across and then sort of shade in some green and then a little bit of darker green. And it works very well as well. It's also a nice colored pencil, will often give you really nice feather texture just by the way that it shades, which is also really nice. So I'm gonna mix up some more green. I'm gonna use a bit of that green that I mixed with that. All right. That's a little darker than I thought it was gonna be. All right, I'll lift a little bit. So if a color is ever too dark, you can always wipe off your brush and then sort of use the color that's already there, and that'll lighten it up so that you're not continuing to add paint. You're just taking some away. All right, so I'm gonna add a little bit more texture in here, just sort of taking some green and just sort of suggesting that there's little feathers in there. And then I'm actually gonna come in with a little bit this color in here because it's a little bit bluish here. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of that. A little more of a bluish green. All right, is this dry? It is, perfect. Okay, so now that this area is dry, I'm gonna come in with some sort of browns and grays. I'm gonna mix up sort of a grayish brown for those feather edge shadows, and then just sort of block in those. I'm gonna make my brush very fine, just kind of go along. You can also do this with a very sharp pencil as well, just to sort of block in those feather edges. Right. There we go, and then I'm going to shade in those primary coverts here. And there's a little feather here that's darker. And I don't like how prominent these three feather edges are. So I'm actually going to clean my brush, and just with a wet brush, I'm just going to lift those up so that I don't really see them as prominently. It's going to sort of lessen that. And that's also something very nice with watercolor, is if you don't like something, you can just come back with a wet brush and lift it up again, and it doesn't really stain. All right, I'm gonna work in a little more blue here, that little spot there. All right, so now I'm gonna move to that bright blue on the head. So for that, I have a nice cobalt blue that I think is going to look pretty good and work pretty well. I'm also going to mix it with a little bit of gouache. And gouache is basically opaque white watercolor. And I use it a lot for highlights, but I also use it to sort of get more of sort of a thick opaque tone to the paint. So I'm going to clear a little spot. I'm going to clear a little spot here for it because I've already put some cobalt here. All right, so that's going to be for that color. Here's that sort of cobalt blue. So that's kind of what it looks like. And that's not quite the right brightness that I want, so I'm going to add a little bit of gouache to it, which will brighten up that cobalt very nicely. Sort of. There we are. Okay, so now that I've sort of tested that color, now I'm going to sort of shade in this area sort of with the first wash of that bright blue. So along this edge where it meets the green, if you sort of leave a line, it kind of looks strange. If you see here, there's the feathers sort of lay on top of each other like that. So you can sort of take either a sharp pencil or a small brush and just kind of make a few little lines into the green. It sort of looks more natural, like the feathers are sort of together like that. And a shade in there. All right, so now that I've got my first wash, then I'm going to a little bit more, a little bit brighter color. Just sort of continue. And I'm going to do the same thing here with that red. See how there's little lines into it. I'm just going to sort of dot along the edge so that it looks kind of natural, that it sort of fades in to the red. I'm going to shade up like that. Actually going to come back with the red a little bit and do a few little lines into the blue along that edge, under the chin. There we go. The paper's starting to buckle a little bit. Put a lot of washes on it. All right, so now I'm going to come back with one more wash of blue. Just to sort of do that final little, one final wash. For the eye. Like that. All right, so now I'm going to give a little bit of attention to the tail while this is drying. You can sort of see it glare. It's still very wet. So I'm going to sort of mix up that same sort of grayish brown that I used for the edges of the wings here. And I'm going to draw in the tail. The tail doesn't need much attention, just as long as it's there. Just sort of one little line of paint should be enough. So I'm noticing that the secondary coverts here are not quite as dark as I'd like them. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of a darker green for that. And sort of fade that out at the edges. All right, so now I'm not really liking how this transition is going here between that blue and that red. So I'm gonna try and fix that. I'm not sure if I can. If I can't, that's all right. I'm just gonna see what I can do about that so it's a little bit smoother. All right, so now I'm going to work, while that's drying, I'm going to work a little bit on the legs and the feet. So I'm going to, again, mix up that sort of same grayish brown, although a little bit paler this time for the feet and the legs, and just sort of shade in. Here's sort of where the toes are and the legs. Doesn't have to be too fancy. Just sort of like that. I'm just going to quickly put in some just basic brownish color for the branch that it's on, just to sort of suggest branchness. There we are. So now while that's drying, I'm going to give a little bit more attention to the face. Is that dry? No, it's not yet. Okay. In that case, I'm going to just sort of let this dry for a second. And if anyone has any questions, if there's any questions in the chat, I can take some of those now.
Fiona, there's a question about color mixing. Can you just speak a little bit more to how you got to some of those dark greens, for example?
Yes. So I have a lot of different greens in my palette. And so I would sort of go with sort of a grayish green. This is called chromium oxide. It's a very nice sort of base color to start with for a lot of things. And then sort of mix it with a more yellow green, like that. And that's sort of what I'm doing to get this color here. So this plus that equals that for this little area here, and also some spots on the wing. And then sort of for more of these olive greens, typically if you take green and mix it with a little bit of orange, it'll sort of turn out more olive colored. So like even a bright green like this, if you mix it with a little bit of like this color, so kind of an orangish color, those two together sort of make an olivey green. So that's kind of how I got to those olive greens, is with that kind of bright green and then a little bit of sort of an orange color, kind of a sienna. Yeah, so that's kind of quick hit on my color mixing there for those dark greens. All right, this appears to be dry. Good. So I'm gonna take a little bit of gray for the beak and just sort of lightly give it a little gray wash. Not gonna give too much attention to the beak, just a little bit of shading like that. And then for the eye, I'm gonna get some black, sort of carefully shade in the eye. And then for that lores area, I'm going to get some sort of gray, kind of muddy gray color, and just sort of put some paint there for that little area. So then around the edge of the eye, there's that bright red eye ring. So I'm going to go back to that bright red paint, and I'm going to carefully paint in that little red eye ring. There we are. So now while that's drying, I'm going to give a little bit of feather definition to this. There we go. Yes, all right. So now that we sort of have some paint down, or if you have some colored pencil, this is still drying. So now I'm going to sort of put in a few little final details. So something I love to use is a white gel pen. So this is like basically an opaque pen that can go over dry watercolor. And I really love it because it really helps. It can add highlights to things. So for instance, on this bird's beak, you can see there's a little highlight here and a little highlight here. So I can sort of draw in that little white highlight like that using that gel pen. Oh, it's not really working. Hold on. Sometimes these do take a second to get working again. There we go. Just to sort of put in that little bit of highlight, and then on the eye as well. So something that's super cool is when you put a little highlight on the bird's eye, it totally brings it to life. So like to me, the eye of this bird looks kind of flat, but if I bring in even just a little highlight on the eye, it suddenly really brings the bird to life and it looks like it's looking back at you. And that's a super quick little trick to sort of make the bird sort of pop off the page, is to add that little white highlight to the eye. I'm actually going to add a little bit in the feathers surrounding it as well, just to sort of define it a little bit from the lures. And this is also a really fun tool, and something about it that's kind of funny is it's so fun that I'll find myself starting to put it everywhere. So after a while, you need to put down the white gel pen because I know it's fun, but there can be too much. And I have overdone it on drawings before. So I am going to put it down, even though it is a lot of fun. So I'm also going to take a little black pen and just sort of go over a little bit of definition on the feet. Just sort of some squiggly lines will do just fine. Just to sort of suggest that there's scales on the feet. Defines them a little more than the paint does. Just add some fun to that. I think I'm also gonna do a little bit of definition on the beak as well. There, and if there's any like edges that you want cleaned up, you can use a black pen. If there's any feather edges, if you want to define the edges of the wing in black pen, you totally can. If you want to define some of the tail or something like that, you totally can. I'm going to sort of leave it like this. And so something else that I love to do is fun titles. So often on a nature journal page, I'll like write a fun title. So I often will just take my pen, my brush pen. I'm just going to write Painted Bunting here using the colors that I used for this. So it's not quite right, the consistency of the paint. There we go. And I'm going to sort of fade in that blue. Here we are. I'm going to put some little green lines around it. There we are. So that's kind of a fun title. And you can use the same paint that you use to paint the bird and write a little title. And then if you want to write any questions you have about it, or if you want to write the date, I think I'm going to write the date in the corner, 6/16/22. And it's okay if you have little color tests here. And it doesn't have to be perfect at all. If you want to make little notes, I'm just going to say such a bright green. Because it's so bright. And that little red eye-ring is really cool. So I'm going to make a little note of that. I'm also going to talk about how the wing is sort of green and orange. I wouldn't have expected that. I would have thought it would sort of have been gray. So it's kind of cool to notice when you draw a bird, like this is something I had never thought I would notice about a painted bunting before. And it's really cool that drawing it allowed me to notice that the wing is sort of orange and green. And I would have never thought that. So I'm going to write, didn't know the wing was orange and green. Yeah, so that's kind of how I would quickly add in some observations, and that's kind of it. So if there's any questions anyone has, I can take some of those now.
Amazing, Fiona. One question was, would you put anything else in the background of your painting?
It sort of depends. If like the background is really significant, like if it's in a specific setting that I want to show it in, yes. But if it's just sort of a quick sketch, probably not. I don't usually add backgrounds. But sometimes if I do, sometimes I'll kind of have fun with it. I'll just do a little sketch here in the corner. Like I'll draw the bird sort of like this, its little beak, its tail, its little legs. And this is something that I learned from Jack. Which is to put sort of a little circle of habitat behind it, with the bird sort of breaking the frame of that circle, and then sort of add habitat in that circle behind it. Here, I'll go over it with a little bit of a darker pencil so you can see. So kind of in that circle, so that you don't get like super carried away with drawing like every leaf of every tree behind it. You can just sort of add in these little habitat circles. And you can sort of just get a quick, like just shade in, there's like some trees back here or something. And you can just kind of give a quick little impression of the background behind the bird. So often I'll do that. And that's kind of a quick way to just sort of contain the background so that it doesn't like spread all over the page and you get too carried away with it.
I love that. And can you say more about what else you put in your nature journaling pages? Can you just speak to all the things you like to include like that?
Yeah. So sometimes I'll have what I call a wow box, which is basically, it just sort of looks like this. It's a little box and it says wow in it. And I'll point to something with that little box and then I'll write something about it. Be like, wow. Such interesting colors. And then like, I would also wonder like, why are these colors all together on one bird? Like what's the advantage of having all these three colors? So I'd sort of draw a little line off that, draw a little question mark, say what's the advantage of having these colors. So something that I love to do is ask questions. And I don't necessarily like go home and Google all the answers to all of my questions. But if there is one that I want to look up, I can. But I don't, it's not about the answers for me. It's about the process of asking the questions and where those questions take me. Because often if I can start with sort of a simple question, and then I'll sort of go off on a chain of questions. And often the question at the end is the one I actually want to look up the answer to. And if I had answered every single question on that chain getting there, I would have never gotten to that question. So I just sort of ask questions without worrying about the answers. If I get to one that I'm like, ooh, I want to ask someone about that, or oh, I want to look that up, then I will. But I definitely don't like go through and answer every single one of my questions. So that's, I'm also going to make a little note about this. Lures. I'm going to say lures so prominent on buntings. Why? Like that kind of thing.
I love the curiosity that you're showing us and how to bring that to the journaling process. And there's a question of how has this made you a better birder?
Yeah, this has trained me to notice a lot more about birds because I'm sketching them and because I'm looking at them through the lens of how would I draw that. I notice a lot more. And I also get a lot more out of birding because I'm stopping to draw it. And often I'll get to see behaviors and birds that I wouldn't have seen otherwise had I not sat down and drawn for 10 minutes. And so instead of just sort of moving on from bird to bird to bird to bird really quickly, I tend to sort of take my time. And I see fewer birds for my life list, but I do get to see a lot of more common birds doing a lot of really cool things. And that has really opened the door for seeing really cool behavioral stuff and learning a lot more about the birds rather than just seeing a lot. So that has sort of been something that has improved my birding for sure. And yeah, just noticing a lot more and getting to spend a lot more quality time with birds and getting to know them a lot better.
And Fiona, you know, with 2,000 nature journal pages to date, or just since 2016, you're a really powerful example of that dedicated practice, or as you're calling them, pencil miles.
Yeah.
What would you say to all of us who haven't put in that time yet, or like, what would you say to encourage folks to keep drawing? And, you know, how do you overcome any of the challenges along the way?
Yeah, I would say don't be scared to draw. Like if you don't want to show your drawing to people, that's totally fine. You don't have to present your drawing to anyone. You can keep them all in your basement if you want. And you can just keep drawing. And as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right. And don't worry about the pretty pictures. No one starts drawing beautiful, perfect birds. And so the more you draw, the better you will get. And it's also really cool to save those drawings. And then you can go back and look at some of your older ones and be like, wow, I've grown so much. And that can be really encouraging. And that's also something that I've done, like go back and look at some of my old nature journal pages and see like, wow, I have come so far in my drawing and in my question asking and in my observations. And that's also really encouraging as well. So I'd just say keep drawing. And as long as you're having fun, you're doing it right.
I love that. Someone said they have a nest of baby hummingbirds outside their door. And is that a good idea to draw? They're wondering.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, as long as you don't get too close and disturb the parents. Yeah, if you have like a little sit spot that you can sit and draw from, that's awesome. You can also like draw it over time, like do a little quick sketch every day and be like, oh, look, the babies are poking their heads out, or oh, look, the baby's hatched. Oh my gosh. And you can like document it over time, which is super cool. I love doing pages over time, like documenting. Like I drew a flower from bud all the way to seed for a couple weeks, which was really cool. Drawing it every day. And yeah, that would be a super cool, a super cool little project to do.
Awesome. And one more question before we wrap. What would you recommend for a beginning watercolor set?
Yeah, I would recommend just sort of going to your local art store and just finding a small palette that just works for you. Don't start with like too many colors. Just sort of start with basic colors, and you'll sort of learn what colors you want to use and what colors work best for you, and just sort of work from there. So yeah, I'd start with sort of a simple palette and then just kind of figure out what to do from there, and what works best for you.
Awesome. And Fiona, do you want to go to your other camera so we can see you?
Yes. Let me turn
All
off
right.
that. Yeah.
The artist behind the scene. Is there anything else you want to share with everyone while we have you?
Just thank you so much, all of you, for coming. I really hope you enjoyed it, and keep drawing. You can do this too. Go outside, watch birds, nature journal, have fun. If you want more drawing tutorials, you can go to johnmuirlaws.com. He has hundreds of hours of free drawing videos that you can also learn from. Some more specific things like how specifically to draw bird feet or wings or beaks and stuff like that. And also just kind of general things like how to draw trees, how to draw landscapes. And so that's a great entry place for journaling as well. So thank you all so much. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. You're such a passionate example of what's possible, and to see that Painted Bunting come to life in 1 hour exactly or less was truly remarkable and very inspiring. And we're just so lucky to have you. So thank you so much for your role modeling.
Thank
and
you all, and happy Pride. Love you all.
And happy Pride. So if you want to see this class again, we will be sending it via email. It will also be up on YouTube. And you can also find out more on our Let's Draw Birding class website on the Richland Bay Audubon Center's website. So please check that out. And if you did draw today and you want to share, please share on Instagram with the hashtag Nature Journal Audubon. And we'd love to see how your painted buntings have come along. And may you always enjoy the love of birds, and maybe perhaps through this drawing medium. So thank you, Fiona, so much for showing us the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.